Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. While we're waiting for everyone to join, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can write your name and your affiliation, and you can tell us what you're currently working on. And if you like, you can also write about maybe a challenge that you're having with generating evidence for your innovation project. And we'll start when all colleagues have been able to join. Let's just give it a few minutes and then we'll kick off. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Maybe I think everyone is here, so we can start the session. So welcome to this joint session for the UN Innovation Scaling Group and the UN Culture of Innovation Community, which are two thematic groups under the UN Innovation Network. I'm the community manager of the Scaling Group, and I'm joined here with Ruth from the Culture Group. And today we're actually going to be diving into a very critical topic that is important, especially for scaling innovation, as well as for fostering a culture of innovation. And it's the importance of generating and using evidence. This work is unfortunately not very easy. So thankfully, our colleagues at UNICEF have developed a fantastic resource to support all of us. It's called the Innovation Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Toolbox. And today we're welcoming Luna Kim and Shalini Subia from UNICEF's Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning and Knowledge Management units to introduce us to this toolbox and how you can all use it. So Luna and Shalini, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mira, for the introduction, and thanks all the colleagues joining from hopefully all over the world. Welcome to the session. We're really excited to share the Innovation MEL Toolbox with this community. So this scaling group, we engage with this scaling group actually when we share the 5D innovation framework, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But you can consider this MEL Toolbox as kind of like a sister resource to really help your scaling process and make sure that your scaling process is evidence-based, right? So yeah, let's dig into that. Victoria, if you don't mind sharing in presentation mode. So before that, quickly just to introduce our team here. So I'm Luna. I'm leading the evidence and insights team at UNICEF Office of Innovation. Our team's work is essentially to bring rigor and evidence into innovation scaling process. So now today I'm here with Shalini, our M&A specialist in the team, and also Victoria, who is supporting us on everything around comms, and also Edie, who is the main designer for this MEL Toolbox. And even though they're not here today, there are two other colleagues who also have been instrumental to this work, who is Shen, who was the lead developer of the toolbox, and there's Katerina, the designer of the Miro tools that we'll show you in a bit as well. So it was very much a joint team effort to show you what we're going to show you today. So yeah, let's start with the next slide, please. Okay, so before we dig in, because I don't know how many of you are very familiar with UNICEF Office of Innovation structure. So we're an independent office supporting everything around innovation within UNICEF, right? We have different teams within the Office of Innovation. We're headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden, but we also have thematic hubs in Helsinki and Copenhagen as well. So we're mostly in Nordic countries. but we cover a wide range of initiatives and work streams, starting from foresight type of work called nodes, also supporting external startups through our venture fund, and also investing in digital public goods, everything we do around measurement and evidence, and also internally supporting our country offices in innovation strategy development, portfolio management governance, and building a culture of innovation within UNICEF, right? And as I mentioned, there's some hubs which are thematically supported. And there are also special initiatives like GIGA, which is school connectivity project with ITU. So this is just really quickly to give you an overview of our Office of Innovation. And next slide, please. And another thing we wanted to mention is that we have also adopted a portfolio management approach to innovation, which means that it's not just looking at a single innovative product solution, really looking at an entire portfolio with a predefined set of problems that we want to solve through a portfolio approach. So currently we're taking a portfolio approach thematically. So we have 9 thematic portfolios where we have portfolio managers for. But yeah, this is the basis of the approach that we currently have. Next slide, please. Okay, so now to the MEL Toolbox. So we in the pre-survey, we also wanted to kind of gauge like what is your familiarity with scaling frameworks, and if there's any challenges, right, that colleagues have when it comes to scaling innovation, right? So one of the common challenges that we've been facing is that, okay, so there are a lot of traditional M&A tools already out there, right, for outcome monitoring or impact evaluation, you name it. However, innovation has some unique needs, right? It's more fast-paced, it's more dynamic, there are more need for continuous iteration, and we need to pivot more frequently, right? So how can we actually, meet these needs for Innovation MEL, right? Which is not just proving, but improving as well. So this is what how we like to explain Innovation MEL. It's not just about proving how things are working, but it's really inherently about learning and iteration and pivoting based on evidence and data, right? So how can we keep improving our innovation so it can actually scale and reach the potential that it has, right? So this is where we kind of started from. Is there any resource out there to really guide innovation evidence generation? So this is where we started from. Next slide, please. So the outcome is a comprehensive compendium of methodologies and tools, right? So these are not prescriptive. These are more like a curated set of resources that people can pick and choose from. We're not saying you have to use certain tools. You should not use certain tools. It's not like that, but it's more like a very user-friendly guide to kind of like walk you through what kind of methodologies are already curated for innovation monitoring and evaluation. Next slide, please. So again, like in our pre-survey, we asked if colleagues are familiar with the 5D innovation framework. So this is a framework that UNICEF also developed about 3 years ago to guide our innovators to scaling, right, more systematically. Because we know that a lot of innovations get stuck in pilot, and we need more structured guidance to be able to really understand what it takes to scale, right? So it comes down to these 5 dimensions that we distilled from years of experience that UNICEF has in scaling. So we need to look at innovation, we need to look at business model, impact, scalability, risk. So these are the 5 comprehensive dimensions that we need to look at. And we also defined sub-dimensions like, financial viability, adaptability, things like that, that one must check before moving on to the next stage of innovation, right? So next slide, please. So in UNICEF, we've adopted a maturity model of 5 stages of innovation. So from ideation, pilot, acceleration, transition to scale, and scale. So this is the maturity model that we're using. And this is also what you will see in our MEL toolbox, because it's all stage specific contents that we curated, right? So next slide, please. So the 5D framework is more prescriptive, right? So 5D framework actually shows that, oh, like to be able to actually considered a pilot, or to be able to be considered a transition scale stage, you must meet XYZ threshold, right? Of the 18 subdimension of 5D, because these are the things that you must address before you scale in order to not fail in scaling, right? So that's the whole idea of 5D. So then the question is, okay, we get that. It's important to show the causality before we enter the transition to scale of the solution, that we have to demonstrate a viable business model. So we get that, like what has to be met, right? So now the question is, okay, so then how do we actually measure that financial viability? How do we actually measure that adaptability that 5D framework says is important, right? And that's, again, where the MEL toolbox comes in. So you can consider 5D as like what, and the MEL toolbox answering the how part of the question. Next slide, please. All right, so I think, yeah, we covered this already. And the next slide, please. Yeah, just to mention that also the toolbox was very much developed in a co-creative manner with other UNICEF colleagues, right? So from country offices and regional offices and UNICEF HQ, represented by different functions of innovation, technology for innovation, development, and also evidence functions, right? So it was a year-long co-creation a journey that we had to go through. And now we're super excited to share what is in stock for you. So let's go to the next slide, please, Victoria. Okay, great. So some of the key features. So for this one, I'm just going to do a demo quickly. So I'll share my screen. All right. I hope you can see my screen. Okay, so for external audience, we mainly have a PDF to summarize everything for you, right? So unfortunately, this is not, we were really hoping to have this published before this webinar, but hopefully it will be published in a few days actually, and we'll share the link with all of you. So this is a PDF of the MEL toolbox. And there are essentially two main user journeys that we have. So one is cheat sheets, and then the other one is like repository. So in case you want quick answers, you can quickly go to the cheat sheet. If you want to like browse all the resources that we have put together, you can take time and actually look at our repository. So if the cheat sheets are pretty easy to digest, so if you just click whichever stage that you want to go, then we have already worked out, okay, these are the things that you have to measure for pilot stage, and these are the tools that is recommended, right? So you can easily just see what we have already curated as like an easy to use like cheat sheets, right? Or if you want to browse, there are tons of we've done a lot of homework in terms of bringing together all the relevant tools and toolkits out there that we have reviewed and curated for you. So it's in Google Spreadsheets. And if you open this one, you will see 3 tabs. So one is like all tools, which is again organized by different 5D dimensions and also different stages, right? So for instance, let's say you have a project that is an acceleration stage, and then you want to see what kind of, tools are useful for acceleration stage, right? So this definitely includes way more than what's in the cheat sheet, right? So you can just browse what's feasible, and then we also add like hyperlinks to other resources that we found, and also we have classified what kind of matching 5D dimension and subcriteria this is addressing, right? And same for toolkits. Sometimes, there are already like a great toolkits out there, right? So like, for instance, UN Global Pulse is scaling the summit, which are applicable for scaling acceleration of above stages, for instance, right? So again, like, yeah, this is a curation of useful toolkits that we have. And lastly, we also wanted to recognize that it's not just about single products and solutions, but systems innovation, which is really becoming more and more important, right? So we also put together all the resources around systems innovation here. And we also, again, like tagged it for your easy use. So like if it's about like mapping systems, is it about like sense making? Is it specific to related to learning? Is it innovation focus, portfolio focus? So you can like filter by different ways that you want. So yeah, this is one way to use this toolbox. And for some of the tools that is in the cheat sheets, again, like cheat sheets have our curated tools, some developed by us, some adapted by us, some adopted by us, right? And we have also prepared this Miro template, which you can just duplicate and start using. So these are already pretty user-friendly templates that we built for different tools that we've included in the cheat sheets. So yeah, this is another resource that we have. And for UNICEF colleagues, I know there are some UNICEF colleagues in this call. We also have a role-based chatbot that is built within Microsoft Teams. So that's another thing that we'll share, but more specifically for UNICEF colleagues later. All right, so I'll now hand over to Shalini to walk you through the actual contents of the toolbox. Over to you, Shalini.
Thanks so much, Luna. Okay. Sorry, I was just looking at Victoria's screen. Hi, colleagues. So nice to see all of you here, and thank you so much for joining us in this presentation of the MEL Toolbox. Victoria, if you could go to the next slide. So I'm just going to be taking you through. As Luna introduced, I'm an MEL specialist, also working on the Office of Innovation Monitoring and Evaluation team. And I'll be taking you through how we've actually conceptualized for each of the stages, thinking through what innovation needs, what evidence innovation actually needs. If you can go to the next slide. So
I think we need to go two more. Yeah, two more.
Sorry, two more, please. Yeah. So we're just going to go through how do you use the innovation toolbox, and just to have a bit of an example here. So suppose meet Sarah, right? She's an innovation program manager at UNICEF, and Sarah has designed a mobile health app that bridges the gap between clinicians and pregnant women. Now, how does Sarah actually think about building this app and generating the specific evidence that she needs in order to actually set this innovation up for successful scaling? So suppose Sarah's at the ideation stage where she has the idea for the solution, and she wants to understand how is she going to, what is the value proposition of it? What is the value proposition to the users? What is the value proposition to stakeholders? And so for this, we propose a value proposition canvas that she can use with various other stakeholders to really define what the goal of the solution is and how it's going to generate value. And also, as she's testing it with users, we put together a user survey, which is aggregation of a number of user surveys that are out there that have been validated, and she is able to use that and adapt that to really get validation from users for the idea. When she moves into the pilot stage, then she wants to look at what is the feasibility of the solution when integrated into the health system. And in this case, she can use from the MEL Toolbox, she can use a feasibility assessment checklist. And she can put in place process evaluation guidelines to make sure that she really understands how the solution is working in practice. Now, when she goes to accelerate stage, maybe she wants to know how to adapt it, how to adapt the solution and to aggregate, as she adapts the solution, to aggregate information about how the adaptation is happening and what she needs to actually do to customize the solution for different contexts, right? So she can use a tool called the Fidelity and Adaptation Monitoring Tool, and then also generate evidence of impact using methodologies that we've curated around impact evaluation. And at the scale stage, once she's ready to deploy it at scale, she can look at the toolbox and she can use it. She can say, okay, I want to understand what is the impact of the solution when integrated into UNICEF programming, and I can use cause and contribution methodologies to really identify that impact. So this is just a demonstration about how, the Innovation MEL Toolbox, we really have curated a comprehensive compendium of innovation evidence methodologies. But as innovation managers yourself, or innovation as MEL colleagues working with innovation, you can really identify what your specific need is, and then identify which methodology would be best suited from the MEL Toolbox and apply it. And the MEL Toolbox gives you the guidelines and the tools to apply it to your specific case. Next slide, please. So how to use it and where to start? What we recommend is, if you're using it, if you want to do a gap analysis or an analysis of where your solution is in terms of the scalability of the solution, what we recommend is that you start with a rapid 5D assessment. We have tools related to the 5D as well, where you can do a web assessment where you can work through each of the dimensions and the metrics of the 5D: impact, innovation, scalability, business model, and risk, and do a rapid 5D assessment and identify the gaps. So, for example, in a particular metric, suppose you think that you're not able to actually say that what the feasibility of the solution is, then you have a need to generate evidence around how feasible is a solution in a particular context, right? So then you'd go into the Innovation MEL Toolbox, and you'd look at the different cheat sheets or the different tools, and then select a tool from that would allow you to generate that kind of evidence. The other way in which you can do it is that you can say, okay, I know my innovation is in the ideation phase, or I know my innovation is in the pilot phase, and so I want to know all of the evidence that I should be generating, right, to really give me good information for me to be able to plan effectively for the scaling of the solution. In this case, you can go to the relevant cheat sheet in the PDF or on the SharePoint to understand what needs to be done, and then to use those methodologies, implement those methodologies while you're piloting the solution or while you're ideating. And in the last phase, if you want to go, if you don't want to be anchored in the 5D or in the innovation stage, you can also go to the tools and the toolkits that Luna just showed you, and really browse and filter the tools based on the different criteria, like the 5D metrics, 5D dimensions and metrics, or the innovation stage. And you can really look through the curated list of the tools and methodologies and see what is, decide what tool you need depending on the need of your solution. And next, please. So just to take you through what we've curated in terms of the ideation stage, and this is we completely recognize that there's a lot of different methodologies that can be used at the ideation stage, right? And this is the cheat sheet, as Luna said, is basically the minimal the least that we should do to really determine to really make the case for a solution that's being ideated, right? So, and the focus of the stage could be you identify a specific problem, you want to understand when the solution's in ideation phase, you identify the specific problem, you understand the context and the target population, and you could address this in two different ways. Either you could select an established innovation and and try to determine whether it fits that particular context, or you could generate a new innovation solution to match the problem and that particular context. And what you want to understand in this is, what is the scope and the severity of the problem? What are the characteristics of the target population? What is the current solutions that exist and the gaps? And in this case, you'd want to use secondary data and existing evidence to really understand all of these different, the scope of the problem. Once you've ideated the solution, you also want to understand, you want to have a set of hypotheses about how the solution is going to work in practice. And the typical way in which we do this is through drafting a theory of change. But what we recommend is that the theory of change for innovations should not be static, right? In a lot of cases, when we're doing programmatic work, we tend to draft the theory of change and that stays static through the course of the program. But what we would recommend is that this is really, at the ideation stage, is very much an initial theory of change, which then should be iterated through the course of development of the innovation as you get more information that either proves or disproves your hypotheses. And if you decide to pivot, then thinking also about how to redraft or redraw the theory of change to follow your new hypotheses or your new assumptions. The other thing that we recommend is around the value proposition campus to really explore the fit between the target group and the value proposition. Secondly, I mean, you want to understand, what is the desirability, acceptability, feasibility of the solution? Is it easy to use? How does it perform within that user context? And what is the functionality of it? And we have, as I said in the previous slide, we have curated the Wizard of Oz methodology, which is basically allows you to test the product and service aspects by simulating functionalities. We've given guidelines around what are the user analytics and metrics that you can use to track user interactions, and then also user feedback survey to gather user perceptions. And the last thing that we really recommend in the ideation stage is around adaptive management and learning. And this is something that we recommend for all of the stages, essentially using, we've recommended the pivot diary, but using a methodology to document and reflect on decisions, document the changes in directions, and adapt the solution, systematically adapt the solution based on supporting evidence. And this is, as Luna pointed out, this is really important because as the innovation iterates, it's important to understand, make those decisions on iteration and pivoting and development really based on existing evidence. Next slide, please. Now, you're past the ideation stage, you're in pilot stage. At this stage, you want to field test the innovation to understand whether it works in a real-life setting, and you want to take this opportunity to understand whether to continue developing it, continue scaling it, pivot it, or stop it, right? So at this stage, we really focus on, we consider this to be a little bit too early for an impact evaluation. Of course, it's perfectly possible to do an impact evaluation at the pilot stage, but typically in this stage, what we would say is the minimum level of evidence of impact is effectiveness, essentially correlation between a positive change in the outcome and the innovation, and how you would, you can use a number of different methods, but what we recommend is pre-post testing, as in conjunction with more significant change methodology, where you compare the outcome measures and you also use a qualitative methodology like the most significant change methodology to understand how the change happened, why it happened, and how the beneficiaries and other stakeholders actually experience the change, right? And then you continue to use user analytics and metrics to track user interactions as well as user perceptions. Another thing we really recommend in the pilot phase is to have understand the feasibility of implementation, and we've included a feasibility assessment checklist, which gives you a checklist to go through as you're implementing the pilot, to really give you a framework through which you can collect data to assess the operational and technical aspects of the innovation, including the identification of potential risks. We recommend that you update the theory of change to make sure that it reflects the new information that you gathered through the piloting. phase, and then also continue to use a pivot diary. The other thing that we really recommend is to start telling the story of your innovation, right? So a lot of the times, we're not able to explain all of the work that went into developing the innovation, all of the pivots, all of the iterations, and that always ends up being a very compelling journey, right? Because you're gaining so much information about the user and about how the users and more information about the problem and the context, and really collecting that documentation and describing that innovation story really can make the case to donors and to other stakeholders who are investing in your solution. Next slide, please. And then this is in the acceleration stage, which is when you are deploying to multiple countries and you're testing the solution in multiple countries and multiple contexts in order to gain information to be able to construct a solution that you can replicate successfully, right? So just to make sure that it's easily replicable as well as effective in various contexts, it's really important to test it in various contexts before scaling it up globally or regionally. So in this case, you really want to make sure that you have a scaling approach, goals and assumptions, and this would be based on your theory of change. In this case, you also want to make sure that as you really want to identify what parts of the solution, as you're adapting to various contexts, you want to make sure that you understand what parts of the innovation are adaptable, right? And which parts of it form the core, which should not be adapted, which should not be changed in order to maintain the effectiveness of the solution. And so we have this fidelity and adaptation monitoring checklist that allows you to assess both the fidelity and adaptation and the quality of the implementation. And the goal is to really, at the end of this phase, to be able to understand what can be adapted and what should be left the same. In addition, we really recommend that at this point you do a process evaluation to improve the implementation, and then also calculate the benefit or the future value of the solution. And this is really important because then you're able to speak to the cost benefit of the solution and make the case of the value add of the solution in comparison to the solutions that are already existing within the space, right? And then you continue to understand what the acceptability, desirability, usage, user engagement, and satisfaction is across different contexts. And this gives you information about how you would adapt it to different cultural, different contexts. At this stage, it's really important to now articulate the impact of evidence, the impact of the solution. And at this stage, you could use impact evaluation methodologies, experimental, quasi-experimental, or contribution analysis, in the sense that, of course, quantitative evidence is really important to understand the impact of the intervention. But in many cases, as I'm sure we know, solutions that are integrating into programmatic activity, it may not be easy to isolate the effect of the solution. And in this case, it's also possible to use rigorous qualitative impact evaluation methodologies, under the overall umbrella of contribution analysis, to really understand what the causal contribution mechanism is, and how beneficiaries and other stakeholders are experiencing change. And again, to continue using adaptive management and learning, as well as documentation and describing the innovation journey in order to continue to advocate and communicate about the solution. Next, please. And finally, at the transition to scale phase, at this point, the solution should be completely baked and should be ready for replication and adaptation across large geographies. At this point, the theory of change should be updated to reflect all your scaling assumptions, and it should be completely baked so that you can use it in order as a basis for evaluation. And at this stage, at this stage. It's also important to do an overall evaluation that shows you what the process should look like, evaluate the process and the implementation, as well as impact evaluation using quasi-experimental or experimental methods complemented with contribution analysis, and supplemented with the cost-effectiveness analysis. And this basically allows you to speak about the implementation effectiveness and impact at scale, right? So at this point, it's important to have that evidence as you're scaling globally to be able to speak to the impact of the solution, and to continue using adaptive management and learning methodologies that should be baked into the solution and should be part of the deployment of the solution at country level. Next, please. And finally, as we know, systems change is becoming more and more important, right? So innovations need to work within particular systems. They need to reshape and transform the underlying systems to tackle problems that are result of complex systems. So we have curated a number of tools and approaches that allow us to both inform the systems approach as well as gather information and evidence while you're implementing the systems approach. So in the systems approach, initially you would map the scope and the boundaries of a specific system that you're trying to change, right? And really map who are the main actors and the conditions in the system, how are they related, what are the power dynamics, what are the feedback loops, and this really gives you the information to be able to understand, what are the levers that you need to change, and what are the dynamics that you need to affect through incentives or through innovations or through policies in order to get the system from where it is right now to where you want it to be, and where you want it to be will then impact the outcomes that you're trying to change. And in order to do this, you would use a systems mapping approach. We have recommended a software called Kumu, where you can use second data, literature reviews, policy analysis, benchmarking reports to be able to map the system. But this can also form the basis of a workshop where you can bring actors in to validate, to give more information, to facilitate the mapping, but also to validate the mapping. And then in order to understand what the actual pathways are through which change is happening, we recommend a change mapping methodologies through which once the leverage points have been identified, you're able to map how those levers are going to work and what are the pathways through which you expect change to happen and how you expect all of the different actors to move in order for that future system to come into being. As the system changes, it's also important to continue to monitor, right, the different innovations that are being implemented, and you can see the different cheat sheets, right, to be able to implement these different tools, right? So if you are, for example, in a systems network, you've identified an innovation, but you've also identified a policy, right, that needs to change. Then the program itself will work on both of these things. But then for the specific innovation, you can also use the tools that we've curated to really map how that innovation is changing and scaling. And finally, in a systems innovation project, it's really important to track and manage the progress of the program, because you need to make sure that all of these different aspects of the system are changing along the timelines that you expect it to change and in the kind of sequence that you want it to happen, right? So that the policy is changing, that enables the system for an innovation to work, that enables the system for beneficiary behavioral change to happen. So you really need to make sure that all of these things are happening on time. And so to set up those monitoring evaluation frameworks and to document and reflect on what changes are happening and how they're happening, but also really important to when thinking about evaluation of such efforts is to take into account to use contribution methodologies. Very hard. It's quite hard to understand the change that's happening through quantitative methodologies. So to use contribution analysis to understand how change is happening and why it's happening, and how further change can happen, right? So this is, we've squeezed quite a lot of information into this one slide, but I think the PDF and the SharePoint gives you a lot more information about how these tools can be used in practice, and it's also reflected in the Miro code as well. Next slide. Yeah, so thank you. This is an overview of how to use the MEL Toolbox. I'll hand over to Mira now.
Sure. Luna, did you want to go through some of the questions that came into the Q&A box?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. And we'll be, of course, happy to hear from colleagues, like any reflections, reactions, questions, and feedback that you may have. But we already had a number of questions that came through the Q&A box, so we can just quickly go through that. So from Aswini was asking about what MEL approaches do you recommend for systems change programs? So that's what Shalini just covered in the last section. So the cheat sheet for the systems innovation can be quite handy, but there's again the tools repository of the systems innovation, right, where a lot of systems related toolkits have been put together. So yeah, you're certainly welcome to go through them. From Zusi, sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing your name. I'm sorry. I know you also contributed to our 5D framework review, so really appreciate that. So from UNHCR, will it be available for other agencies? Yes, absolutely. I mentioned that at the very beginning. So we're just days away from publishing this MEL Toolbox. It was supposed to be published before this webinar, so sorry about that. But yeah, we'll share with all the registered colleagues to share this toolbox once it's published. And from Patricia, what advice do you have for colleagues who are unsure which stage their innovation sits? The lines between pilot and scale are often blurry on using the MEL Toolbox. So for this one, well, at least in UNICEF, we have number of stages, right, already between pilot and scale. We have acceleration and transition to scale. So for us, being able to understand where you sit, where your innovation sits, right? I think that's very critical, right? So we have that definition that we use for the MEL Toolbox, which is the same for our portfolio management approach. So that's there, but if that's not sufficient, actually a good way is to use the 5D framework, right? And then if you are actually meeting the threshold for, let's say, accelerate stage, but not transition to scale, right? Then maybe you are at acceleration stage, right? So I think it's actually a good way to do that. And that's what Shalini was also mentioning, right? To before using the MEL Toolbox, it's always good to kind of go through that 5D kind of light assessment to understand your evidence gaps. And then depending on that, you can also kind of see, you know, what MEL focus you can have, right? So that's the most recommended approach. But of course, you know, like if you just want to quickly browse through, then you can just browse through, like, you know, 2 or 3 stages from the Excel spreadsheet, the Google spreadsheet. So you can just filter, you can multiple filter, you know, for multiple stages. And what kind of support or guidance is available for teams or partners who want to try using 5D and the MEL Toolbox in their own context? Yeah, so for this one, please do get in touch with us. I shared the email address for our team. We'll be more than happy to support you on this. And there actually have been many colleagues who've reached out already. Like, you know, we've launched the 5D innovation framework externally at the STI forum a few months ago. And like, for instance, like a community-based organization in Kenya reached out to us, like, to ask how we can adapt this tool for community-based innovation, for instance, right? So we'll be supporting them for that request, for instance, right? So depending on what context you're talking about, it may be like a humanitarian or maybe a thematic context. But anyway, we'll be very happy to discuss this with you. And 5D and the MEL Toolbox, both of them are thematic neutral, agnostic, right? So it's not anchored in any one specific thematic area. So it's pretty adaptable. But we also know that in some thematic cases, they want to have specific criteria, for instance, like added or adapted for that thematic context, right? So which we also can support. So please do get in touch with us. But I'll also put in the chat our web assessment tool, which is already available online. And if there's any technical issues, we can also troubleshoot as well. Okay, I think that's it. I see there are 3 open questions. I don't know. Can I hand over to you, Shalini, for the rest, the new questions?
Sure, yeah.
Okay?
Thanks, Luna. The Eduardo, considering the financial reduction for some UN agencies, what kind of strategies are you executing? I think that's a great question. It's a, this wasn't necessarily the one of our considerations when we actually started to build the toolbox. And definitely, I think one of the bigger things that has come out in the last couple of years, while we've been building the toolbox, is the focus on a business model, a sustainable business model, as well as the need for demonstration of cost effectiveness of solutions. And this is something that we've really tried to address through the course of the through the toolbox, is a focus on helping solutions think through, and especially I think in new agencies, we don't necessarily think of sustainable business models, right? Right when we start building when we start ideating and building our solutions. So really keeping the user at the center and thinking through what a specific sustainable business model would look like, as well as generating a lot of data on the cost effectiveness of the solution, so that you're really able to, in conjunction with evidence of impact, really able to make the case for why the innovation should go forward and why it should succeed. So, those tools are very prominent in the toolbox. And I hope that answers your question, but please feel free to have a follow-up if there are any doubts. And then from Trust, how can innovations be sustainably scaled in fragile, rapidly changing contexts when needs continuously evolve? Completely agree. I think this has come up many times in the context of innovations, and the fact that innovations need to be iterated as they're developed. The key, I think, is a sustainable business model in conjunction with really focusing on adaptation and learning, and both have a key part in our toolbox, where we have tools that are dedicated to adaptation and learning, and making sure that there's a lot of that we continuously get feedback from users and take user behavior and user feedback into account, right? So from a digital perspective, many of the solutions that the Office of Innovation invests in are digital solutions, and we support them, and we help them build dashboards that help them track user behavior, track user churn in the system, downloads, feedback, etc. And that data really helps to iterate and develop and optimize the solutions over time, right? So I think this is very much inbuilt in the way the Office of Innovation conceptualizes innovation, right? Constantly adapting and optimizing for user feedback. And then in conjunction, as we said, this is a challenge for the development sector right now, but and the UN as well, to really prioritize sustainable business models from the very beginning while ideating solutions. Do you have a selection of case studies? From Atika, do you have a selection of case studies applying these tools as reference inspiration? This is something we're building currently. We're testing the MEL Toolbox with UNICEF country officers and colleagues. And we hope to have, be documenting case studies from these tools through the course of the next this year and the coming year, and then be able to document that and present that and add that to the toolkit going forward. So then it becomes a complete resource so that you can also use these case studies as inspiration. But yes, if, as Luna said, if there's any interest in collaboration for testing and applying these tools, please do reach out to us. We'd be very happy to take you through these and collaborate on applying these tools.
Looks like we don't have any more questions. Luna has kindly added all of the links to the 5D Innovation Framework web tool and the page, as well as the email to the chat. So if you want to get in touch with them, you can get in touch with them there if you have any more questions. I think we have come to the end of our session today, unless there is any final questions. I see not. So thank you, Luna and Shalini. I hope everyone who joined today has gotten a lot of practical tools and some fresh ideas to apply M&E to your work and gather evidence for innovation. Before you go, we would like you to answer one poll and give us some feedback. So Ruth, could you just launch the poll? And once you've done that, feel free to log off. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you for our colleagues from UNICEF, and thank you for everyone joining today. We will be sharing a recap of this session, the recording, as well as all of the resources mentioned today via email to everyone registered.